Howdy, everyone. Welcome back for a little business mojo in the morning, as it were. I only got a small walk-in with the dog today. I feel like I'm going to need a much longer one. Maybe I need to go do some kickboxing or something. I just, last night was our school board meeting, and they were discussing how we're going to move forward and things like that. And I have to say, I'm extremely impressed with the leadership of Richardson ISD. I think our superintendent and her team are doing a really good job in a really difficult time. But one of the reasons I'm like verklempt or still have this bottled up, I'm an empath. I just am. If you don't know that about me, it's the way I am. And there were so many comments submitted for the open comment section of the board meeting that it took them 3 hours and 40 minutes. Yeah, 3 hours and 40 minutes to get through them all. And that's with them being a minute or less, a minute and a half, minute or less. And it just was heavy with the amount of fear and uncertainty and passion. And there was interesting in a minute and a half, what you can get from somebody else reading somebody else's comments is you could hear the hurt, you could hear the shame, you could hear the threats, you could hear the judgment, you could hear so much through the entirety of it that it just was heavy. And so I promise you this has a point to today's topic. And by the way, if you're watching us live, say howdy so that I know you're here. If you're catching this as a replay, say replay, make a comment, let me know you saw this. If you have any thoughts, feel free to contribute those as well. And if at the end of today you feel like this was of huge value, I would love a little social media love and sharing of this video, because I do think there's a lot today that we're going to cover that a lot of people can benefit from. But yeah, so weighed heavy on the comments and everything that was going there. And I noticed for myself, I started getting frustrated and not angry, frustrated, definitely extreme frustration, we'll say. So I decided to stop listening. And part of the reason I decided to stop listening, it wasn't being positive to me and I wasn't being able to maintain a positive mindset around it. And I was starting to tell myself the stories from these like minute and a half little snippets, right? And that's what we do. That's what our world is shaped on, is sound bites that provoke stories. We're getting there, right? So I turned on Brene Brown and I was like, okay, maybe she'll have something to say. Maybe I can find the positivity. I can see the filter that I need to see in order to understand and be compassionate and be, I don't know, lead with love in a time full of dark. And so as she's talking, she brings back this topic that she covers. She says she brought it up in the book Rising Strong. I have not read Rising Strong. And she said it was a concept that didn't have saturation, wasn't prevalent enough for them to really think about bringing it up from their research. But she decided to in Rising Strong because it was still a common thread that she saw in people who were resilient. And I thought, oh, well, that's perfect, because I've been having that conversation in my brain of going, look, times are kind of funky, not going to diminish that at all. But I think we're really seeing the extent of resiliency, because resiliency isn't something we as Americans have really, it's fallen out of our fiber, as it were. And so it's been a question of mine, just about how are we building resiliency in our children and ourselves and our team, all of those things. And she tells a story of her and her husband having this conversation in the lake, and she was like, oh man, this could be a total shitstorm. That's her word. I love it though. She's very Texas. And she goes, I had to stop myself and really start to say, she goes, and it involuntary came out of my mouth. And she was talking to her husband. She goes, look, we could have this argument. We could have this whole, blow up on our vacation, but that's not what I wanted. And she goes, the story that I'm telling myself is, And she talks about that being that key point that turned really in her conversation with her husband and with the arguments they had. And she's like, I don't really feel like we've had arguments since then. Not that we've always been calm, but I find that we're always starting it off with the story that I'm telling myself is. And that is a really powerful phrase. And it really does link back to our discussion about stories today. Because, and you've heard me say this, we're hardwired. We understand stories. From the time that our parents read us a story and the time that we read to our children a story, we are preconditioned to understand the story. Now, the story has morphed from being the written word to being sound bites, which is why they're so pervasive. But if we can understand the role of story for ourselves and in our business and for our interactions with other humans, then it's something I think really elevates your leadership and your ability to lead from a very positive, even flawed way to being able to move forward for something. Now, the big vision that I have is really about empowering prosperity for every business owner, because I see what a lack of prosperity does for a human. I've probably have been in just about every socioeconomical range there is in my lifetime, and I see what that does. And I see what it does when you've got somebody who aspires to transform and they're having really a hard time doing that because they've never been here before. Hola, it's Wario Rojas. Nice to see you. Good morning. And so really in talking about this, okay, and bringing it back into business, how controlling the story impacts scalability. And here's the really interesting thing. When it comes to scalability, it really is about less control than more control. Most business owners are control freaks and a half. I am a card-carrying member of Control Freaks Anonymous. And my entire adulthood really is about letting go and allowing. And it was so interesting talking to a few parents this weekend who are in elementary school. One of my friends was like, I'm realizing I have to let go. And I'm like, oh, isn't that the truth of it? So when we look at controlling the story in a business, no habla español, lo siento. Yo comprendo más que hablando. So, why does this matter? Is really about, do you take a centralized approach or decentralized approach? And there's this excellent little metaphor that in my research I was finding, and it's really, there's a top down where you as the business owner tell the story to your employees. And then there's the ability for the bottom up, okay? And so from the bottom up kind of standpoint is really where scalability starts to happen. It's where ownership starts to happen. It's where accountability starts to happen. But that transition from the owner telling the story to the employees and the employees being a part of the story is an interesting one. It's a transformation. And transformations and rebirths are not always easy and pretty, right? So if we look at this, if we come from where you're centralized, then you're looking at, you are the bottleneck, okay? You really are, because it all has to flow through you and you have finite capacity. We're human. When the employees control the story, then you're much more of a facilitator. There's more things that can happen and swirl, and more cogs can flow and turn than you ever could if you were the only one turning the handle and making things go. So no one wants to be told the story, but they desire and they yearn to be a part of the story. Okay, and that's really a big difference. So if you can understand how you can take your employees from being told the story into a position of being a part of the story, then you unlock this little bit of magic that happens. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you 3 tips to be able to really bring about that in your business and start laying the groundwork so that you find that your employees are more engaged. Like I said, they take ownership and accountability. They hold you accountable, which is always interesting and humbling. But really, it's for the betterment of all, right? It just empowers prosperity, just not only for you, for your business, for your clients, and for your team. And that's the win-win-win-win that we were looking for in business. So the first thing is your role as a business owner has to morph from being the traffic cop to being the long-term visionary. And that's hard for a lot of people, especially right now. It's really hard to have that long-term vision, but we need clarity in what we desire so that we know how to move forward to it, because it's going to be a little rocky for a little bit, right? So we need to have a lighthouse. We need to have a beacon. We need to have something calling us forward. That is your role. Your employees can be a part of the discussion, but at the end of the day, truly believe that it has to start as a seed within your heart and within your mind, so that people can come and they can collaborate and they can support you in that. 2 is you've got to set rhythms, boundaries, and rewards. Part of having your employees take ownership in things like metrics and in cost or expenses, right? And this is, you can see this across a lot of our major business management books right now. Scaling Up by Vern Harnish, Traction by Gino Wickman. I think Scaling Up is much better than Traction. And then what's our third one? Oh, The Great Game of Business, Open Book Management. All 3 of these, and even Lean Startup by Eric Ries, all of them have these underlying components as part of their proprietary system that is the same. And that is a rhythm of accountability, which they like to call, either weekly huddles, weekly meetings, where all you're doing is doing, are we on track? Are we meeting our goals? Are we not going to meet our goals? Why? How does next week look? Very ticky-tack, if you will. It's not a time to harp and bring in the shame and the judgment and all of why aren't you doing your job. It's a temperature check, if you will. We're going to be having a lot more of those, aren't we? Then there's boundaries. So boundaries is something that you need to define as the owner. If you do have a larger team, then your leadership team can be a part of this. And boundaries aren't about discipline. I think we need to be clear about that. For a boundary to be effective in a business, we don't need discipline. I mean, that's the negative way of saying it. If you break this rule, we will blah, 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 blah. That's our past. It really is. But if you can say, here's your boundary in a positive way, you can write these for your clients. Amazing. A client code of conduct, that'll fix a lot of issues in your business. But an employee code of conduct, people need to know what you consider to be success. But when you're going to hand off ownership and accountability, you've got to give some boundaries. Like, what is the level of decision that they can make on their own? How can you empower them to do that? When do they need to seek counsel? When do they need to come together in collaboration? When is it that this decision has reached enough impact, let's say, or has enough other considerations that really need to be considered by all levels? When is that moment? Because you really do need a guidepost, because what we want to do is, our whole goal is to have our team act as we would like them to act. So you do need to define what those boundaries are. And it does take a little bit of time, not going to lie about that. And then rewards. If we're creating prosperity for all, how do they share in the rewards? And having clarity around how they share in the rewards is key. I was on a webinar yesterday where they were talking about that shared reward system. And when it works the best is when it's consistent and when it's clear and transparent, when people know that they're moving toward that goal and they can see the little ticks on the gauge, how close are they? So you do have to start to think about, if you think, I do equate running a business to raising children because at the end of the day, I want my children to be independent, ability to take care of themselves and have an impact And that's kind of what I want for my business as well. So I'm looking at like, how do I teach them the good habits that I want to teach them? Right. And then the last one, the last kind of tip is that once you've moved through the vision and you've rallied your troops around the vision and they're clear about what it is and you can communicate it. That's what we were talking about with values last week, right? You can communicate it. And we've set the rhythms of accountability. We've defined the boundaries of the ability to impact and what success looks like. And then we've defined and made clear the rewards that people can gain by participating and enjoying in the process. Then we need to go into a role of how to train, support, and give feedback. This is like that second half of the facilitation, because really and truly, I believe it has been in my experience from my clients who have team members, even when they're very doubtful about a team member. I believe everyone comes to the table from a place of good. Like they want to have impact. They want to bring value. I will say that there are people who've learned some really bad habits along the way. And maybe they're not the best team member to have at the table. And it's okay to let them go. I will tell you, this process will highlight that in spades. Suddenly, if you've got that back of the neck feeling, putting something like this in place just like shines a flashlight on it. All right. You need to be brave enough to take care of that situation so that all this effort that you've put in really does have the time to mature and the time to bear fruit. And I always look at it as when we've got a poor fit in our team, that employee is not being served any more than we are. And it may be, like I said, some poor habits that are kind of like a codependent relationship in there. But they're better served by allowing them to move on. Like sometimes we just hang on too long, right? And especially if we have tried to train and we have tried to persuade. And when it's so obvious that you have a round peg in a square hole, we need to remove that so that something better can step into its place. And it almost always is something better that steps into its place. So you do need to know that your role, especially as you grow, especially as you scale, stops being about doing the ticky-tack work, like the little nuts and bolts, and starts being more about the team. If you take care of the team takes care of the clients take care of everyone in the process through their patronage, and it does become something that is a much more beneficial cycle in your business. So empower your employees to think and act like an owner, to take accountability and responsibility for the results in the business. You don't have to shoulder that, or at least not anymore. Right? Not if your true goal is to rise above. And that's really where we start to see prosperity for all. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will go delete all these spam comments that we're getting as part of our thing today, but that just tells me that we're reaching out there. So you can help me if you are listening here and actually obtaining value from this versus trying to spam me like crazy. Say howdy, say replay, and share this with your friends so that they can see and get value from this as well. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you're having a beautiful day. I hope it's profitable. I hope it is filled with light, even in the darkest situations. And if I can be a part of that, please let me know. I'm happy to help. This is Leslie Hassler with Your Biz Rules Business Coaching. And until Thursday, we'll be seeing you soon.